Hi, folks. We're Tacitus today. Tacitus State, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about why and how, what the primary drivers are of increasing food prices. And in this instance, I'll sort of focus on restaurant price or takeout food restaurant prices in particular. Why are they running so far ahead of wage inflation? And one of the things that sort of was always struck me about when you look back at the economics of and the pricing, cost of food, cost of real estate, and all that sort of thing in the 1970s, when I first had some sort of cognizance of it. Bear in mind, I'm in my 60s today, but so it's certainly within my lifetime these monumental pricing changes have occurred. So now, at some future point, equilibrium may be re-established, but it doesn't look like it. It looks like it's sort of set in for the long haul here. Now, if you use sort of, say, look at in the early 1970s, what was the price of a Big Mac in the 1970s? Now, in Australia, so we're talking Australian dollars here, I'll use it to illustrate the point. A Big Mac was 50 cents. Now, I look at the adverts, which you can still find online, they look like some pretty big sort of, truck driver, labourer type dudes had the Big Mac in their hand, and it seemed like quite a big burger. And if I look at sort of the Big Mac today, it doesn't appear to be the same size. It appears to be smaller. Now, I've spoken to some people in the fast food, in McDonald's actually, and they deny it. No, it's exactly the same size. So maybe they were just using very small-handed models back then or something. I don't know. Or maybe it was some sort of early iteration of AI where the the burger size was inflated. But I don't think so. I think that if you look at all the manufacturers of food, whether it's chocolate bars or anything at all, cereal, I mean the list goes on. They've reduced the price of, reduced the size rather, and put the price up. So what was a 100-gram chocolate bar is now a 75-gram chocolate bar, and it still costs 20% more than the 100-gram bar did. So it's really, excuse me, it's really a sort of an industry, food industry-wide tactic of making the product smaller but increasing the price. So it certainly looks to me as if the Big Mac is smaller. And again, comparing the size of a Big Mac in my hand today compared to what it looked like in the hand of the advertised model in the 1970s, it looks very different. Nonetheless, let's look at the pricing. So a Big Mac was 50 cents in the early 1970s in Australia, and there is a slight price variance depending on sort of where you are in Australia, but the Big Mac average price is between $8.60 and $8.90. That seems to be the range. You can get a little cheaper if you get like on an averaging basis. If you buy, say, a Big Mac meal where you get fries and say a drink or an ice cream or something like that to go with it, then you average out the price, and you can say that you're getting the drink for half price or you're getting the Big Mac at a lower price. But look, just a standalone Big Mac on its own. Now, this is a price inflation since the 1970s that goes 60% beyond wage inflation. So if wage inflation, if the Big Mac pricing was kept in line with wage inflation, it would be give or take about $5.50 instead of almost $9. So if we look, so that's 60%. The Big Mac is 60% more expensive than it was, and I would argue probably 30% smaller in size. For example, the beef patty was meant to be 200 grams in the 1970s. Now, if you get a Big Mac, which I've done, and weigh it, maybe it began as 200 grams before it hit the cooking plate or hit the oven or something, but it's certainly not now. So it's beyond, I believe, in my view, it's beyond dispute that the product is smaller. There's less in there. Now, on top of that, the McDonald's in the early days was still establishing their supply infrastructure, and they've taken huge strides in there and sort of really taking control, monopolizing certain parts of the food supply chains, and have realized very substantial economies beyond what they would have had when they arrived earlier on in Australia. So I think they arrived in the late 60s in Australia. So if we look at that, McDonald's has reduced their operational cost, it's certainly in terms of procurement on food, and they've reduced the size of the product, and their product is 60% more expensive compared to wages, 60% more expensive than it was in the 1970s. Let's look at where has this price increase come from? Remember, they've realised greater efficiencies in food procurement than they had then. So they've driven, on a relative basis, they've driven down the cost of the food that they buy. So where is this additional? Are these prices being driven up by cost pressures? Well, it's not wages, because wages wage inflation is again far behind the food price inflation. So if there's a proportion of cost, wage inflation is not it. I can't find anywhere the suggestion or implication that wage inflation is the issue. Certainly not in terms of the wages McDonald's are paying and the purchasing power of those wages, or any fast food chain. I'm only mentioning McDonald's because it's well known. I'm not singling them out, far from it. Even there's a local, sort of takeout in the village that we live in. There's a local takeout food shop. They do like takeout chickens and fries and that sort of stuff. And if you want to get say two chickens and some fries and garlic bread and a couple of Coca-Colas or Socolas, that sort of thing, they still want $50 for that. So it's comparable really to McDonald's pricing. It's if it's any cheaper, it's by a small amount. Now, like everything that they provide in that $50 takeout food, bearing in mind the convenience, you can walk in and walk out with the food, but I can buy that. I can buy ready cooked chickens at the local grocery store. I'd have to cook up my own fries, not that a big deal, and buy a couple of bottles of cola, and so I could do that for about $32. So for the convenience, I'm paying them $18. Given the amount of time to do the fries, maybe you say, well, the aggravation in going to the grocery store and buying this, that sort of thing, is the $18 convenience premium worth it? Maybe not, depending on your circumstances. If you're working long hours and you're dashing home at high speed and you just want the food situation done and dusted, over and done with, the $18 maybe is good value. If you're on a tight budget, then $18 would be a lot of money, unless you're doing it maybe once a week or something. But even that's more expensive. But again, wages isn't the driver for this. Wage inflation is falling well behind price food inflation, so it's not that. If wage inflation was running at give or take about the same, somewhere in that category, and you say, well, wages are a big part of this. Price inflation, food price, but it's not wages. Now, on top of that, the quality of people that they're getting at McDonald's or any takeout food doesn't have. Again, I'm not singling them out. The quality of people they're getting is just diabolical. The service is fucking piss poor compared to what it was. McDonald's was seen as a real career option for people back in the day. People would join, or getting a McDonald's franchise. It would make you a millionaire. That was it. It was a guaranteed sort of millionaire thing, and within a certain space of time. They're not becoming millionaires in the same space of time now, and some aren't even getting anywhere close. The franchises. So But in terms of career options, maybe in the head office there's some, but in the stores, being a trainee and becoming like an assistant store manager at a McDonald's, busy McDonald's assistant store manager, that was considered a real career job in the 1970s and even into the 90s. I'm a shift manager at McDonald's, then you almost visualize X, has got an IQ of 80 and is lazy and useless. And the image that comes in your mind. And certainly, if I look at the shift managers, some of them do work hard, by the way, so I don't take that away from them. But half the shift managers around, they barely speak a word of English, and you can hear all these weird accents and languages being screamed out in McDonald's. Some McDonald's shop, there's not a single white person working there. In the outer suburban McDonald's, you're getting the lower end of the working class riffraff of people, even in their 20 years old, half their teeth are missing. They're covered in scabby tattoos, and they've got diabolically bad attitudes. Even a simple request involves an argument and it's just insane. As I've mentioned a number of times before, if I go into a McDonald's store or again any takeout food chain or any takeout food shop, and you say, well, I've got an email from the head office that says you've got such and such on special today or this week, or oh yeah, well show me, and they don't know what the specials are. They don't know, they don't give a shit. They to even get them to look on their own website to see it, I mean, they roll their eyes and sigh as if you're putting some sort of insane imposition upon them. But so they put it back on you. You have to get onto your phone. You have to prove it to them. Hey, you're right. This is what your company is promoting this week. Why do I have to prove it, for goodness sake? So the quality of service is that, and there's no keen sort of career-minded young things that are working. They're eager to give good service, eager to learn, eager to improve themselves, eager to build a career. You just don't come across those people anymore. They're just not there. So wages aren't it. Service has gone down the crapper. Is the quality of food better? Which, if it is, I don't notice it. I would say no. The quality of food, servings are smaller. Now, there's a broader menu now. The menu was fairly focused on sort of the burgers, fries, and the thick shakes. It was sort of fairly. Now they've got a lot more. You've got different types of coffee, and you've got bagels and I don't know, muffins, and quite a pastries and danishes. You've got quite a range of things. It's much broader range than it used to be. So there's certainly that. But in those broader range, the products, those are profit boosters, and they're not what you'd call price competitive in my view. So a coffee at McDonald's is slightly cheaper than maybe you'd pay in a gourmet coffee shop, but the gourmet coffee shop provides a far superior product. So all in all, where is the push factor? Why are prices increasing at this rate? Now, if you look at the relative profitability relative to sales, that sort of thing, there's certainly a higher profit factor in there. But again, that's not the driving thing. It's more profit, but it's not it. That's not the it that we're looking for here. And the real issue is the primary issue, the one issue that trickles down into all food prices is the cost of real estate. If you could lease a property for a restaurant for $100, in the 1970s, but that same property is no longer $100, but it's $1,000 or more likely, $3,000 to rent. Then that means you've got to price that into your food products, and that's where the prices are that's where the driving force is coming from now, or the primary driving force. Now, there are other sort of, I don't know, they're on the tangent, I would argue, but there are other there that the some of the suppliers of the food, for example, there's quite a lot of monopolies and oligopolies. For example, in dairy products, multinational dairy companies have bought up pretty much all the dairy production. and you can track as the percentage of international monopoly, oligopoly ownership of dairy products increases, you can see that the price increasing in proportion. Now, this is a bad deal for Australia because these international companies, they buy up the local dairies, and they do it with borrowed money from international sources, so that the interests and the benefit and so on are taken up by international firms. A lot of international brokers are used, and those are offshore, so they realise large and very artificial profits for arranging the deal. Now the tax paid, because they've got a lot of offshore debt and management fees and all sorts of other fees, then the local entity makes next to zero profit, so they're not paying any tax. As in corporate income tax, those sorts of things. Various arbitrage methods are used there, and they're able to artificially push down wages. So this restricts the wage inflation factor as an input. But in a lot of this food production, wages may account for less than 10% of the overall production cost. So even if wages doubled, it still wouldn't come anywhere near to accounting for the 60% plus increase in food prices ahead of wage inflation. So food inflation, for every 100% of wage inflation, food inflation is going up by 160%. But the biggest factor is, it comes back to whenever you crunch the numbers and the arithmetic, and it comes back to property prices. Whilst those property prices are increasing at that rate, then that's the major push factor for food prices increasing. It's not wages. Now, again, the monopoly control side means there's artificial price increases because they've got a monopoly and not having to compete. That is a factor, not the primary factor, but it is a factor. So when you look at all these things, monopolies and oligopolies on supply and offshore acquisition for artificially inflated prices, arbitrage to minimise or reduce or eradicate all tax paid at a corporate level, and of course rents paid. Now, if you look at the cost of, say, this is in property terms, a McDonald's store that's in the middle of nowhere, but it's on a main highway near, say, some sort of rest stop or a petroleum station, something like that, gas station, then the rent that they'd pay on that store, per square foot type thing, per square meter, is far, far less than you'd pay in a busy downtown Sydney street. And there is a little bit of difference. I noticed that in one sort of place out the way on a highway, the Big Mac was $7.95 compared to $8.80 in a city store. So there's a difference there. But if you look at the difference in rent that they pay per square foot, it's a huge difference. So there's a closer effort at international standardization of pricing, or national standardization of pricing on say Big Macs or other food. Why is it I'm paying the same, give or take, the same for a sandwich in downtown Sydney as I would in some remote little township in the middle of fucking nowhere? The prices should be very different. Local farm access to food, in food inputs would be much less. The rent would be a million times less. Bigger use of family members in the shop, and all these sorts of things. It should be much less, but it's comparable. Now, it didn't used to be like that. I did quite a bit of traveling. I was a biker in the days of my misspent youth, so I did quite a lot of traveling around the rural areas and around Australia and across the Great Plains, that sort of stuff. And the price of food, the difference was huge. You'd pay well under half of city price, and you'd get a bigger play. I remember stopping at a place in some outback somewhere or other, and it was in a pub or like a bar, and they advertised, steak and chips and salad, something like that, fries and salad. And I was surprised at the price. It was again, say, back in the day, it was like $3, but I paid $10 in downtown Sydney for a dish of, and then the thing came out, and the steak was huge. I mean, I struggled to eat the whole thing. It was so much there. So you got a huge helping, and you don't get that anymore. That's not the same now. The price I'd pay for something in downtown Sydney, if I went into some remote place, it would be about the same. There's a lot of these pubs and bars and places like that. They've been bought by national chains that have used national standardized pricing. So that's so the localized effect is also gone. But anyway, when we want to look at pricing, what's the primary driver is the cost of real estate, and that's fed back into food. Remember, real estate, just I remember a pizza, like a takeout pizza place, was for sale. I think it was around 1980, maybe late 70s, but around 90, and it was $5,000. I think the whole business was selling for. Now you look at a comparable business today, especially if you're taking out of the lease, then it's it's 20 times more than that. So this again, just illustrates the effect of real estate pricing on takeout or restaurant food pricing generally, and then you add in again the nationalisation, big chains coming to buy in, and the monopoly control of food inputs. This is where the prices are going. That it's gone 60% ahead of wage inflation. Illustrates, I think, why people are struggling to afford going out to eat. Or and I look at sometimes it just came back to a ham and salad sandwich. It's a pretty sort of basic sandwich on white bread, and so 30 cents it would have been sort of around 1975, and now you're looking at $9 for just a fucking sandwich. So that's why it's expensive, and that's how it became expensive. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.